All right, so first off, you've done the diffusion lab and turned it in. You are done with your labs for the semester. Give yourself a round of applause, pat on the back. You haven't finished the diffusion lab. You still have an extra week to finish that lab or any other labs that you haven't turned in. Yeah, and so from here on out, your only assignments are readings, which hopefully should not be too heavy, and your final project. So, and also, so some people have asked, the final project is your final exam in this class. So if you're planning flights home for Christmas or whatever, just know that the time on Learning Suite, the scheduled exam time you don't have to worry about that. Just have your final project turned in by the last day of exams. The due date is on Learning Suite. Okay. Other than that, a couple of announcements. So I'm co-advised by two professors at BYU. One of them is a computer science professor named David Wingate, and the other is a physics professor named Dennis Delacourt. And both of them are looking for PhD students. So they're researching slightly different fields. David Wingate is in the field of natural language processing and large language models. So the transformer lab that we did, he does a lot of things with transformers and language processing. Dennis Delacourt does a lot with biophysics. So using physics to model chemical reactions and things like that. So if any of you are interested in potentially doing a PhD with one of those advisors, let me know and I can pass on your information and go from there. And yeah, again, just to make it clear, the late lab due date is this Saturday. No labs will be accepted late after this Saturday. So make sure that you have them done by then. Any questions before we get into lecture today? Yeah. Good question. Let me get back to you on that. We will not have class on Tuesday. I think we will have class on Monday, but I'll post on Slack. Okay. Can we invite everybody up to the front again? We're doing another ethics. This is part 2 of the ethics lecture. So we're going to be doing a lot of discussing and passing the mic around, and that's a lot easier if we are all forward. So if everyone in the back could come and sit in the first 5 or 6 rows, that'd be great. Okay. Yeah, and then if you're in the first couple of rows, if you wouldn't mind scooting to the center so people can fit in. Thanks. Okay. So most of today we'll be talking about risks of artificial intelligence related to artificial general intelligence. But to start off, just had one other thing one more pre-AGI risk to talk about, and that is the effect of developing artificial intelligence on jobs and people's ability to make a living for themselves in life. And so I guess the argument here is that AI is going to displace a lot of people from work and is going to, if not displace them, at least compete for their jobs, and we'll see the wages gradually come down until humans can no longer outcompete robots, whether that's just software or whether that's more intelligent agents. So I guess to set the stage for this discussion, people have made this have been worried about this ever since the Industrial Revolution, and possibly even earlier than that. There's always been a general wariness towards technology and fear that of technology taking the place of humans and taking jobs and people no longer being able to provide for themselves. And so I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are on whether, but obviously since the Industrial Revolution, I think the unemployment rate in the US is like 3% or something like that. So not to say that everyone is doing great, but we haven't seen the massive displacement of humans since that time. And so I guess my question for you is whether you think that artificial intelligence will be like previous technologies and that people will just find other jobs to do, or whether there is something fundamentally different about artificial intelligence that makes this problem of job loss and inequality more of an issue than with previous technologies. Now let's get your thoughts. Let's start in the back.
On a study abroad, I toured several factories in China, and they, in some of the more advanced ones, they were pleased to show off some of the new technology they had to take care of tasks that previously required lots of people to do those tasks. And someone asked them where those people are that have now been replaced by these machines. And despite the number of laborers having decreased with the manual work, they were still employing the same number of people because now there were engineers or new roles that were taking care of the maintenance of these machines that were higher paying. And the reason they're able to afford higher incomes is because although the number of people was the same and the incomes that increased, the quality of the product was also increased because it was being done by a machine rather than a person. And also these machines that are being tasked in these industrial spheres, they have a very specific purpose that they're replacing humans in. And so I feel like with every single thing that you can replace people in, you have to design a machine to be doing whatever that task is doing, which is very feasible. Even if it's a creative task or a manual task or so forth, each task has to be specially designed for whatever it is we're using it for, at least. And I'm kind of doubtful on the whole general AI being able to do all tasks. I see it as being able to do like certain maybe laundry or like maybe their general tasks, but it frees up our ability to pursue higher wage jobs or higher education, as well as the fact that even though in the US currently there are a ton of jobs that are opened, all these jobs, and there's a lot of people who are unemployed. The reason the people who are unemployed aren't getting jobs when there's so many available jobs is because the jobs that are open right now are manual labor jobs, and the people who are unemployed are high education people, and so they don't match. And so I feel like as we use robotics and artificial intelligence to replace manual jobs, we are opening opportunities for people to have the high education jobs.
Interesting point. So it sounds like your basic argument is that we're automating low order jobs and creating high order jobs. If I can, and I think that's pretty similar to the general argument that we would see with technology in general. You know, we have factories and robots for manufacturing cars, but that creates higher order jobs of engineers and things like that. If I can push back on that a little bit, I'm curious what higher order jobs you think there are that people will take where they will be able to outcompete AI. Like which higher order jobs you think do you think there are that that AI will not eventually become better at than humans?
Okay, so I don't have an exact answer for this. but I just have faith in the sense that supply and demand and organizational structure will require that such jobs are open, just in the sense that due to the time that it takes to specialize computers and machines to take over manual jobs or lower paying or whatever, however you want to describe them. The rotation time will allow for us to figure out like, oh, we have needs in this other area that we now can put time into because we're able to use robotics to take care of these other things that have consumed most of our time and money.
Interesting. So it sounds like kind of a technology time lag argument that humans will do the jobs until there's enough demand for those jobs that we design specialized artificial intelligence for. Interesting. Okay. Interesting. Cool. All right. Pass this down to Josh.
So I think this is a really, really interesting subject. And I like to think about it a lot. I think something that is unique about artificial intelligence and where it differs than other areas of technology is usually other areas of technology are replacing like low level thinking jobs and tasks. Like, for example, the factories replaced the need for manual workers who were just there for no brain power, but like physical labor. And a lot of those jobs are being replaced, whereas artificial intelligence is actually being able to replace like jobs that require like a lot of brain power, like thinking. And that's something that we can also see is that, you know, jobs that are at risk aren't always necessarily like the lowest, like kind of usually there's a job hierarchy of like well-paying and like low level blue collar jobs. Well, a lot of artificial intelligence can be used to like replace white collar jobs as well, which I think is fairly unique in the fact that most technology only replaces like blue collar jobs. But then I think there's also an argument, though there can be a lot of displacement with artificial intelligence, and technology, there's always the argument that you almost have no choice but to innovate, because if you don't innovate, someone else will. And even if like a country like the United States places like restrictions on innovation that will prevent job loss, another country who is wanting to like be like the new economic power will probably push for that, and they will innovate, thus being able to produce faster, cheaper, better, and then and outcompete. So there's actually, I think, a really strong argument that there's like you're almost forced to either innovate or like just kind of like become extinct, and then the jobs are like at risk either way. So I think that those are like two interesting points that is unique with this.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, maybe separate from the question that I asked, but yeah, like if AI is fundamentally different from these other technologies, what do we do about it? Like, is regulating against innovation a feasible strategy? I think I'd probably agree with you that it probably isn't. But yeah, interesting thoughts. Oh, and sorry, one other thought on that. You mentioned how in the past blue collar work has been some of the first to be automated. Now we're seeing AI take a lot of automate a lot of white collar jobs. I saw one the other day where you could basically query, I think it's by Adept AI. This is a company started by the authors of the Transformers paper. They have an AI that you can like ask it to like search for such and such a product on Amazon and order it to your house, kind of thing. And basically an AI is an interface to any sort of technology. And I think, yeah, perhaps as far as the hierarchy of jobs of like, whereas we used to think of like a gradient of ease of automation from blue collar to white collar, maybe that needs to be reordered a little bit as to like what is currently the most a new ordering based on what is the most difficult to automate based on current technology. I would say that probably some of the hardest to automate jobs on there would be jobs like a plumber or a handyman or an electrician, things like that. Whereas, I mean, other things like a fruit picker actually probably would be pretty low on that. So I think it's interesting to think of like rearranging this framework of blue collar versus white collar that we've had for a long time. And with the current technology and the current AI we have, what is the new hierarchy of ease of automation? Yeah.
So I was thinking about, like, right now, especially in America, we have in mind a 40-hour work week. And I think that the thing that we would be very difficult, if not impossible, to reproduce with AI is personal connections. And so as we have more automation, as we have AI taking care of like the menial tasks of our lives and of our society, then we can make more time to make these interpersonal connections. And I think that that's something that'll never be replaced by AI. So maybe we need to reframe the way that we're looking at productivity and for like where we get our personal worth.
Interesting. Yeah, definitely interesting to think about implications for, perhaps a post-work society, implications on search for personal meaning and things like that. Another other, I think, very interesting kind of down the road questions to ask. Yeah, Spencer.
I think it's also interesting, with this, because basically companies will always do what's cheapest, and it's expensive to make AI or other things to do a certain task. It takes time, but it can be cheaper once you get there. I think a lot of it's also just people have to learn to be somewhat flexible, because, things are changing really fast these days. But, at the same time, not everything's going to change at once, because like as soon as, you automate something else comes up. I mean, that's how white collar jobs kind of showed up in the first place, was because they didn't need manual labor. They needed people to make the machines that did the manual labor. And so, things adjust slowly, and they still end up working out a lot better for a lot of people. And like, is big targets right now for automation aren't just the menial ones, but the dangerous jobs as well. I know there's a robotics company up in Salt Lake that makes exoskeletons, because people are like, well, people are lifting like at the airport, like 50-pound bags, and wears you out, and it's cheaper for them to buy an exoskeleton to help them manage the weight instead of paying for their disability for who knows how long. So I don't know, pros and cons.
All right.
So I just feel like sometimes, even as a student, like we are learning things, and I feel like we are, for those very, very smart people, and we cannot really catch up with them. So for example, like if you want to be a data scientist or machine learning engineer, those kind of Apple, Google, those kind of companies, most of them requires a graduate degree. So like an undergraduate student doesn't even have a chance for an interview for those companies, or a lot of requirement, at least what I saw. So I feel like for those very smart people, they can make something much better than some other normal people, basically. And then they are basically making things that are much better. So for example, in AWS, they have some kind of like automation for like machine learning. You can just put in a data set, and it will generate a model and train it for you, and you can just deploy them. So they will try different models, different algorithms, and different feature engineering stuff, and we don't even need to do anything. So those people basically take over of the lower level things already, because they can make much better and even cheaper.
Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah, I was just going to add something to the conversation. I think it's important to realize that currently, and if things don't change, there's going to be a huge disparity in who can implement AI at like the cutting edge of technology. Because right now, if we look at it, if you look at like a startup restaurant in a city, they're not using AI to like find the best ad to, advertise to people in their city. And so, but like companies like Google have huge access to all of our data and just so much data and stuff. So I think just another interesting point about just employments and other things is, you know, in 50 years, are we going to see Google McDonald's? Like Google is just so big and has so much access to data, and they're the ones implementing the AI everywhere. And, you know, only big companies are able to do that, because if you're just a little company and whatever, you're not going to be able to keep up with big companies. And so are we going to have these huge monopolies of companies that are just taking over everything and forget whether you can get employment or not? You have to go work for a giant company, whether you like it or not, or maybe not at all if they control everything. So I think it's important to recognize there's a huge data disparity, whether we like it or not, in companies or people who have access to artificial intelligence technologies.
Yeah. Can I get a show of hands of who's familiar with the term power law? What that is? Yeah, Drake, do you want to give a shot of trying to? All right, Dane, you want to try to explain it? All right. Well, so the idea of a power law is something that follows an exponential concentration effect. So population growth, for example, in a world of abundant resources with no real constraints, population grows exponentially. In the real world, we do have constraints, and so it eventually flatlines. But yeah, technology tends to follow power laws, where, like Max is saying, we see the winners keep on winning kind of effects, where Google is, like you said, is able to make more effective ads than McDonald's because they have access to more data. And similarly, if Google has access to better AI technology, I mean, Tesla, I'm pretty sure, has been working on self-driving for about 10 years longer than anyone else. And so the question is, like, and they're getting pretty dang good at it. The question is, will other companies be able to compete, or will they just corner the market on self-driving cars and before anyone else is able to develop technology to compete on that level? Yeah, interesting questions.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because we have antitrust laws in the US, and actually, if you look at big companies like Intel and AMD, for the longest time, Intel gave hundreds of millions of dollars to AMD, because if they didn't sustain AMD, they would essentially have a monopoly. So there is healthy competition, at least in this country, in at least some ways. I think in general, the term AI and ML are sort of, there's a lot of nightmare and skepticism about the changes they're bringing our way. I think that's a little bit misplaced, is because although there's a lot of things that are changing, there's a lot of things I also think aren't. I mean, there's a lot of jobs out there that are still bottlenecked by the capabilities of robots. They still have a long way to go. With the exception of Boston Dynamics, robots really haven't seemed to make that many leaps over the past few decades. There's a lot of work that's physical. We probably aren't going to have a hedge trimming drone in the near future, you know? So I think although there's a lot of fear and a lot of concern about what's out there, there's also a lot to take in stride, and there's a lot of sort of leveling our expectations with AI. It's not this silver bullet that just works through everything. I mean, at the core of the AI technologies we've looked at, you have a network that's getting gradient descented to some minima. That's not insight driven particularly. There's no hard and fast rules about the size of a network or the number of layers. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of guesswork in there. And we sort of go off of things because they seem to work. We don't even know that they actually do work. So, I mean, looking at Tesla and the autopilot, I mean, that's kind of crazy to think that we're letting computers go out there using neural nets to drive around, and people have already died because of that. So kind of, there's a lot to think about. I'm not trying to discount anything anyone has said.
Thanks, Dane. All right, any other thoughts on this idea of technology replacing jobs, and AI being different. Yeah, Jaden.
I think it's interesting to talk about the politics behind it, because I do think it's mostly a political and economic question. And when we look at like the past, if you like try to compare it to the Industrial Revolution, like the decades that followed all of that, and were kind of marked with like laws on monopolies and large labor movements and stuff. And we see that, like, I think right now, like union membership and influence is down and has been going down for like the last 50 years and stuff like that. So if you just look at these trends in general, I really think that if we were to find issues with AI taking a bunch of people's jobs, we'd also see like a consolidation of money and a large increase in income inequality, which is already pretty high right now. And I really think that going much further and having, like, if this were to start becoming an issue, I really do think that the political impacts would just find their way to adjust it like they did in the past. You know, we'd have presidents elected that are a little bit more monopoly busters, and we'd have union membership going up and stuff like that, which would kind of regulate it back to probably where it was like 50 years ago.
Interesting thoughts. Yeah. And I think, yeah, well, good, Jared.
Going off of that, I do agree with what you're saying. I think as a society, we're very good at kind of bouncing back when things like a strong AI were to come out. I think we'd adapt to it. The concern I would have with it more would be how fast AI could take over the workplace. Like, it seems like this is something that could just explode and go to everywhere all at once. All the jobs are gone in one moment. And that's where I guess I'd be more concerned, because in the past with the Industrial Revolution and stuff, it seemed like there was more of a gradual change. It can't happen all at once, or we might run into issues. So that would be my concern more with this.
Interesting. Yeah, the speed of technological change, I think that is actually a very real question, and that goes back to I'm trying to remember your name. You made Mark. Is that your name? Yeah, your comment about how basically the ability of humans to have jobs is based on that lag time between how long can a human do a job before technology catches up, and that I think there might be something to that, of like what is the gradient of acceleration and job takeover by AI. Okay, so we'll leave pre-AGI on that note. We're going to continue on to talk about artificial general intelligence and the risks associated with it. So first off, just to define artificial general intelligence, it's the idea that it's a artificial intelligence that is not specialized, like Mark was talking about, but rather is able to do many or all tasks better than a human. And so, yeah, and this is just a visualization of that. So we've seen a lot of really good AI tools for specific applications in the last 10 years. We looked at AlphaFold for protein structure prediction. We've seen image classification, text processing, and text generation. But most of these are single use models. Which can be contrasted with artificial general intelligence, which is models that can generalize to many tasks and perhaps teach themselves. So with that in mind, has anyone ever played the Paperclips game? So this is a game, a very simple, just browser-based game that a developer put out in 2017, and your job is as a paperclip making business. And so you start by manually making paperclips, and gradually you're able to develop buy better technology, and eventually you end up with an AGI that has explored 100% of the known universe and converted it into paper clips. So this is obviously a thought exercise, and it takes many logical leaps. However, its purpose isn't in illustrating the potential problems that can arise when you set up unconstrained optimization problems. And so I guess to ask a very open-ended question, do you think that AGI is a desirable technology that you personally would be willing to spend time working on and pushing forward? If so, and if so, why? And if not, why?
I don't think AGI is unconstrained. You can always constrain it physically. I mean, there's only so much electricity that you can make for a computer, right? And that's one constraint. And even if it does, do these amazing jumps in logic, I don't know, how would it interact with the world?
So your argument is that AGI will always be constrained, like it'll always be constrained by electricity and things like that. I might argue based on this game, which is obviously a thought exercise, but if we give access, if we give our AGI access to buy things and assemble them, I've heard an axiom that I think is kind of an interesting one of basically all of business is bundling and unbundling. And so you think about it, like a restaurant is bundling ingredients into something that you can consume. A farm is bundling seeds and air and oxygen and water into food that we can consume. So with that in mind, if you give the AGI access to bundle and unbundle, I mean, this thought exercise suggests that you could optimize your way into consuming all the matter in the known universe. Energy, same deal. So I guess the question is, is it really unconstrained? And I guess it sounds like what you're saying is it should be constrained, not that it will be constrained. What do you think are the main constraints on just quantum mechanics? Just so are you saying limited in its intelligence, or limited in its physically limited in its ability to accrue resources? Interesting. Okay, we'll let some other people share some thoughts. Let's go, Daniel.
I would definitely, contribute to this. And I think going off again, the constraints, but a different view of it, I think it's pretty easy to put in reasonable constraints, just like with the stable diffusion, you have a not suitable for work filter. And then that solves almost, well, not all the problems, but quite a significant amount of the problems. So maybe once we have our first running prototype of AGI running on a robot, it's like a Baymax, right? It's a soft robot, and you say it can only move so fast. And if it detects a knife, right, it's not allowed to pick up the knife, and it's not allowed to pick up dangerous things. And so generally with some of these things, it would make it so that the accidents and problems that could come from it are very limited, as opposed to if you just made a giant metal robot and then could tell it could pick up anything you told it to, and then you'd have problems.
So it sounds like your answer is yes, you would work on it, but you would constrain it. Okay, let's go, Matthew.
just on the idea of constraining this sort of technology, there's already like some technology that exists where we can't really constrain it for everyone, where we don't get to make that decision. Recently, China got into a little bit of trouble in the because they were attaching machine guns to those like robot dynamics dogs. So they would like helicopter them up to a rooftop, and in training exercises, they just had like these machine guns on their back.
Yeah, so the idea that maybe you can constrain it for your own use, but if the technology gets into someone's hands, it might be harder to constrain.
I think people will only want power as long as they can constrain it. I don't think people will ever work towards power that they don't control.
Interesting. So the idea that humans will never, people will always try to constrain it, and therefore it will always be constrained. There's a reason I worded it the way I did. Yeah, I think, yeah. I think we all agree. I mean, you can speak out if you disagree, but I think most of us would agree that there should be some constraints on AGI, even if we are acting in our own selfish motivations, because even if we want to become dictator of the world, we want that AGI to be subservient to us in those motives. But the question is of wanting it to be constrained and it actually being constrained, I think are two different things, as you said. Other thoughts?
I don't personally I just think it doesn't make a ton of sense to have something that's fully general purpose, just because, you know, things get really complicated. We have a hard enough time making sense of deep learning as it is and getting it to work how we want. You know, that's why it's still a big area of research. And even then, it seems like people still sometimes struggle to understand what it's even capable of. But like, I don't know, it seems like it works effectively when you have a combination of different algorithms or like different things that specialize in their own tasks, and then you piece them together. But, you know, having one thing that does everything, I don't know, to me, it just seems impractical.
Okay, so this is an argument that not that we necessarily should or should not try to develop, but that it is not possible or not practical to develop artificial general intelligence. Interesting.
Yeah, one thing I was just going to share is I think that, and this is coming from like a spiritual perspective, I think Heavenly Father or God endows real intelligence. And I don't know if it will ever be possible for us to like make a computer really be able to be intelligent like a human. And this is getting very philosophical, but I think AGI doesn't exist right now. And I think we could see applications in the future where maybe we have machine learning or artificial intelligence applications from different realms working together to do something more intelligent than it previously was doing. But I don't know if we'd ever be able to like have something, you know, have thoughts and make decisions for itself. I feel like that is something that might just be bounded in a spiritual perspective that just a computer simply can't do. And that's just a general thought that I think maybe before we worry about AGI and other stuff, we should worry about loving others and being more kind rather than whether AGI will take over the world or not, if that makes sense. But it's still good to have these conversations to know, you know, oh, if I give a robot a box cutter, I don't want it to, you know, stab an employee on accident, you know, or stuff like that. I think it's still good to have these conversations, but to recognize, you know, we really are very, very far away from AGI ever being like a real general intelligent being. And I don't know, I think we might do better worrying about other things in this life.
So on that note, what would you say differentiates humans in their intelligence from anything that we would call artificial general intelligence in this class, like a human created by God versus artificial intelligence, whether that's a neural network implemented on a computer chip or some other form, maybe an organic some sort of organic artificial intelligence based on molecules and proteins and things like that. What do you think differentiates?
Yeah, I think with computers, we're fundamentally constrained to optimizing something. But as humans, we're given the light of Christ and we have a conscience and we can know that we're from a divine creator and we have a purpose in life. And so computers, I don't know, that's probably a deeper question than I could even answer, but I think those are some of the constraints.
Interesting. So if I can push you a little further, is a clone something that could be, would you consider that to be true intelligence in the sense of having a spirit and coming from God, or would that fall into a different type of intelligence for you? All right. Yeah. Okay. Interesting questions. All right.
I feel like I wanted to disagree with some of those points, because while spiritually in our faith we can reason about that, there are people who don't believe that, for one. So don't believe that there is a God, don't believe that we are children of a God. So they might have a completely different perspective on that. Of course, we have one perspective. But if we ever do make an artificial general intelligence, which is a high probability, just look at the stable diffusion algorithm and how it can recreate artwork, and that those talks about the ethical considerations of how that artwork looks like other people's artwork, and that those people are complaining about their artwork being represented, but it's not actually their artwork, right? 10 years ago, we may not have even thought that a computer could generate a piece of artwork so perfectly as to make it that artists are now complaining about their jobs because of that artwork. So I think we should keep a very open view that AGI is a real possibility. If we were to string all of the different technologies out there, all the classification algorithms we talked about, stable diffusion, all of those things, if we took them all and put them together into some kind of supercomputer, we could probably get really close at the moment to some sort of AGI.
Yeah, I think those are good thoughts, and it's always good to be modest in our ability to predict what will be technologically possible in the future. I'd like to ask another kind of follow-up question based on what we talked about so far, and that is we've talked about two different kinds of things. We've talked about optimization, we've talked about constraints, and so for an artificial general intelligence, what would you propose as an objective function? It doesn't have to be mathematical, but perhaps in human words, what would you want this AGI to be able to do, and how would you measure its success? And then also, what constraints would you want to impose on that general intelligence? And let's see if we can hear from someone some people who we have not heard from yet today.
What I've been thinking about is we're all just so worried about replacement of our own intelligence with this general artificial intelligence. And I'm just thinking that if we could like make its objective to raise us just as much as it grows, like so that we grow together, that it uses its intelligence to help us to grow our own intelligence, that could be a way that we can get around a lot of these problems.
What falls into us? Humanity. Okay. So like, are we talking about a certain amount of genetic similarity to a certain DNA sequence? Like,
if we don't want to limit it just to human life, just maybe limit it to life in general to help as it grows its own life, whatever that looks like, to help other life flourish equally as it grows. Because I don't think it makes sense to me that this intelligence is automatically going to be like evil. I think that it's possible that if it's true intelligence, it can grow to be more just than we are, more guided by a universal compass of morality. There's no way of saying, but if as long as we're all trying to move forward as a group of living things, I think that could solve things. I don't know.
interesting. So it sounds like, so a couple of things there. So you said the word flourish. I guess one question is, what do you mean by flourish?
I think it would all just come down to semantics. You could say like, I don't know, certain trees might like more sunlight, others might like less sunlight. So to each thing, it'll have a different definition as to what flourishing is. And maybe this general AI would be able to better identify those things that flourishing means per living individual.
Interesting. Okay.
I think that a lot of the greatest discoveries that we have come from people that are specialized in different areas of expertise and kind of combine them together. And I think that one of the measures of success of a general AI would be that it has access to a wealth of knowledge from lots of different walks of life and different aspects of humanity. And so I think that if it could maybe make connections that we can't, just because we can't possibly learn everything there is to know. But if we could create an AI that can learn more generally of a lot of different things, it could make those connections and learn faster maybe than us to maybe help cure diseases and make things more efficient. And so I think that there's a lot of potential for growth and just good with a generalized AI.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm hearing some of these optimization objectives that you're proposing, and some of them sound almost contrary to the purposes for which we would design artificial intelligence. We want to preserve humanity while also advancing intelligence. And so I think, yeah, it's an interesting philosophical question of whether it's possible to serve both of those objectives. Yeah, we're out of time, but I encourage you in your endeavors, your career endeavors, to think hard about these problems, not just chase money, and be very discerning about the work that you do. I think, like Jacob was talking about, it's good to be modest in our expectations in our predictions of what we think that AI will not be able to do. And so just to think down the road and think about the implications of the technology that you spend your life creating. So I leave this with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.